Today on the Perception and Action podcast, what perceptual motor control and gaze strategies do baseball batters use? How can this be exploited by baseball pitchers to be more effective? A case of co-adaptation of skill. So it's time for a call to action. Hello, and thanks for joining me. This is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. If you're a coach or an instructor, my goal is to help you bridge the gap between research and application, and to connect your experiential knowledge with skill acquisition and motor learning theory. I want to help take you from using practice design recipes to becoming a master chef who can manipulate the key ingredients to come up with your own innovative training methods. If you're a student or fellow academic working in the skill acquisition field, I hope to keep you up to date on the latest studies and help you get to know the people working in this area. Finally, if you're developing training technologies, I hope to help you incorporate good motor learning principles in your design, pull out key performance metrics from the data, and design effective studies to evaluate your product. To learn more, help support the podcast, and or work directly with me, please check out perceptionaction.com. Now on to the show. In today's episode, I had a really enjoyable discussion with Randy Sullivan from Florida Baseball Ranch and several professional baseball pitching coaches. Our topic was co-adaptation in baseball, looking at how a pitcher could exploit the perceptual motor control strategies that hitters are using against them. Hope you enjoy.
All right. So, Rob, it's your baby. Why don't you go ahead and...
Yeah, so if you don't mean, I'm Rob Gray. I'm a faculty at Arizona State University. That's the background. I'm a researcher. I've done research for a long time in skill acquisition, baseball, a lot of stuff on visual perception from baseball batters, motor control and batting, some stuff in pitching too, but I think what Randy wanted to talk about kind of today is visual perception in baseball batting, and I feel like a trader here how you can exploit it as a pitcher. So I don't know about how I feel about this, but I guess I could do it. But I'll give you lots of wrong information. No, it's so that I think that's kind of what we want to talk to. I guess also about some of you have heard I do a podcast called Perception Action Podcast, where I talk a lot about this stuff and interview. Randy's been on it and the Dutch guys a few times, where we talk about kind of these skill acquisition in baseball. So I don't know how we want to do it. Randy, do you want to just do mostly Q&A or kind of go from topic to topic?
Let's start with sort of what you know, like Ollie has most of your articles out here already that he's been studying, but kind of a literature review, if you will, a synopsis of, the question that these guys have is, what can pitchers see? What can hitters see? I'm sorry. What can hitters see? What do they have time to react to? Okay. What sensory information influences the decision to swing or not swing? And what sensory information guides their movement solutions when they swing? And so, if you would just give us a summary, maybe go over what you know from your research, and then a little bit about direct perception and, how people anticipate events occurring in the future, coincidence anticipation, that kind of thing. And then we'll I guess, just open it up to Q&A. These are some brilliant minds. And I'm sure once you go through what you know, there'll be a lot of questions that are stimulated, and then people can just kind of, I guess, chime in and ask. Okay. And you can kind of MC that
sure.
And if anybody, and I guess if anybody else that's on the call has some knowledge of something that we don't cover that feel free to chime in and offer your input, and we'll let Rob sort of be the official officiator or the moderator since you've done that before, that kind of thing, and then chime in on what whether that's myth or fact, questions that guys might have. And so, all right, so how's that sound? Is that format going to work, you think?
Yeah. Yep. We can just.
All right. So yeah, I
guess I can go bit by bit. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the research I've done and some of the more recent stuff. So I guess I can kind of go in sequence. So one of the things we've been doing recently, and I've written a little bit about, is kind of where the batter's looking before you actually throw the ball. So that seems to be critical for a couple of reasons, right? Because for a batter to track the ball, right, they have to get their eye to the release point, right? And in most cases, the release points, there's nothing there to look at, right? There's nothing there to hold your eye until your pitcher's hand's there. So it's kind of in practice, it's difficult to keep your eye kind of resting there. If you're not there, then you have to jump your eyes to the ball when it's released. And we know, when you jump your eyes, it's called a saccade, you're kind of blind during that period. So if you do it too late, you're going to miss a part of the ball flight. And so I've observed a lot of what batters that you think they're slow or not reacting well is actually because they're not looking in the right place at the right time, their gaze behavior. So we've studied this a little bit. It's a tricky thing to study because of the speeds involved. But one of the things we're tending to find is good hitters tend to use what we call a pivot point or an anchor strategy. So they tend to lock on something the pitcher. Not everybody does this, but good ones seem to lock on the logo on the pitcher's hat or on their elbow or something and try to kind of use. Sometimes it's called a soft focus. You're just keeping your eyes still and waiting for stuff to happen, rather than trying to look around at what you're doing in your delivery. Although that information seems to be important. So I think that's what a batter's trying to do, kind of keep this still. And it kind of fits with this larger thing you may have, if you read in this area, phenomenon called the quiet eye. Across a lot of sports, we find really skilled performers tend to keep their eyes still before they move, right? To kind of peep. So we see that with the baseball batters. So that's the one thing we see, right? And then we kind of divide information that batters use to kind of make decision about where to swing in kind of the three parts. We have we call situational probability, so the count and the sequence, and the things like that. So those things before they get into the box, trying to anticipate what you're going to throw. Then there's advanced cues, which are basically body language kind of things, right? And in research, we call those we call it from your kinematics, your actual delivery. The speed of the arm slot. Some good hitters can pick up some grip information. We find if their eyes are in the right place. So one of the things, so maybe I'll have some suggestions, but maybe we can think of between us how you can exploit some of this. But one of the things, the pivot point, jumping your eyes to the release point. If the release point differs a lot, if it's changed from pitcher to pitcher or within pitches, it's going to be hard for the batter, right? They're used to anticipating it's going to come out in a certain location. It comes out in a different location. So these different body cues, and then there's information from the actual flight of the ball itself, right? And that, most of the guys you're coaching, right? The amount that you get of that is really, really short, right? Before you have to decide to swing, we're talking like 50 milliseconds or 200 at the most before you have to start to swing. So there's not much, and really, that's where what tunneling is, right? Most people know. So pitch tunneling is essentially trying to eliminate the information batters get from that first part of the ball flight, right? So if I make two pitches come out at the same initial trajectory, even though they're going to go in radically different ways after the couple of first half of the flight or so, by the time the batter has to start their swing and get involved, then there's not much information there. So that's the idea behind pitch tunneling and why it's effective. I have some ideas about why it works for some. It's pitch tunneling. I haven't looked at the latest analytics on it, but I know when I've looked at it, it works for some pitchers and not for others. It doesn't seem to be as a simple story as just making them come out in the same slot. So that's kind of the kind of information. We find that kind of good batters use all of those things. They kind of use the contextual information to kind of start the basic weight shift and movement, the advanced cues and things to kind of shift their body weight, and then the in-flight information to kind of for the last decide when to swing and if not to swing. So they kind of put it all together as they go.
Rob, I have
Sure.
something about the. I hope you don't mind me jumping in.
No, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we appreciate it.
Arm slot idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some pitching coaches tend to try to get the same slot for every pitch. And what you're saying is if you can vary the slot, you might have an advantage. The question is, by varying the slot, if you vary the slot, does it allow him to predict the pitch better and therefore get better in-flight information if he can cue on if he's down here, it's a slider. If he's up here, it's a fastball. Like, are they able to do that? Are they actually able to do that?
Yeah, if it's very different, I find, yeah, you can use the. I also find, that's kind of the initial part of the ball flight. If it's different, like even the launch angle. Like, I know most people probably batters look for the hump in the curveball, right? Mm-hmm. So the initial part of a curveball does this, right, and it kind of rises above the normal plane of their fastball. So
they react to that if they're not anticipating it. If it just surprises them, or like, do they have time to react to it if they're not sitting on it?
If there were time to react to a curveball,
like it goes out of that slot, like it pops up like that. Can they see that and then have time to react, or is it that they have to be looking for that in anticipation of that pitch?
Yeah, that's a good question. I find that really good hitters, the really elite ones, the one I've worked with, can adjust, right? They either like take it or put a decent swing, not a great swing on it. Whereas the lesser skilled ones, no. If they're like really sitting on a fastball and at the best they can maybe check their swing and not swing at it. But
Randy, let me interject here one quick.
Yeah,
sure.
The hump on the curveball primarily happens way before that. There's usually a torso change. A hitter will try or a pitcher will try and get on top of the curveball or whatever. I remember the late Tony Gwynn frustrated Mark Grant, who's a current broadcaster with the Padres, by telling him what pitch was coming even prior to release, just by the tilt of the torso being more erect on the curveball than it was on his normal slot for his fastball. And it frustrated the hell out of Grant because he couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. And Tony picked it up while he was in the delivery. So that's where I see that happen a great deal.
That makes a lot more sense than being able to react to the ball once it's in flight. That they're getting tells from the pitcher's body, that are kind of subconsciously telling them this is curveball coming. Yeah, I can.
Yeah, they can do both. The one that sort of would fit into the kind of advanced cues. The one you're describing, definitely. Yeah, that's what tipping pitches, right, is a really distinct body cue that, glove position, that really distinct body movement cue that gives it away before you throw the ball. Right. But there are some good batters we find in the really early in the flight, like also you probably like the dot in a slider. Right. As a slider spins, it creates like a pattern some batters can pick up. And they're not really like, they're really coarse things. They're like just, that's probably a curveball, that's a slider. It's not like they can know exactly where it's going based on these things.
You were looking at a major league lineup. Like you said, what percentage of those guys do you think in a big league lineup can do that? Like, it's not every hitter, is it? Or
no, I haven't worked with enough to actually measure to make a kind of educated guess on how many, but yeah, it seems like to actually use it effectively to control the movement, I'd say it's a fairly small proportion. Yeah.
So one of the things that these guys look for when they look for pitchers, and I heard Dusty say this, they kind of look for weird, right? Look for weird, like a mismatch between the body movement and the pitch ball flight, like a guy with a low slot who carries the ball that people would expect. Now, what that indicates though is that hitters are working off of some sort of historical reference, which kind of flies in the face of ecological design, right? Like so can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can fit in. It kind of fits into my ecological view. I think it's kind of a calibration process. That's why batters get better like third time through the order. Like they're calibrating their timing based on kind of your movement. And I think they do have kind of a basic, overall. I think the arm slot example is a good one. That's another why having elite spin rate works, right? Elite spin rate breaks the calibration of the flight of a normal fastball, right? It's supposed to do this, and it does that, right? You have to recalibrate, and people can learn, people can adjust to it. But you're right; they kind of have this built-up calibration of how you can how the normal flight, a typical flight of that pitcher, and you're right. Unusual ones are going to throw them off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so those mismatches then. Really, because they've seen so many pitchers, that has ingrained an expectation that when it doesn't match, they have a hard time connecting with that, right? Like, and I know it's a catcher.
Yeah, I think so.
Before it's mixed, it really screws me up. So.
Yeah, I think they have like kind of like I don't know if I'd call it a template or a default kind of calibration, like calibration. Like I give it, the example I always give is when you rent a car, stepping on the brakes. Like before you rent a car, you have an idea of how hard you need to push the brakes to make it stop, and then you rent a car with really tight ones, and you go, oh, you almost go into the windshield because you have to learn the new calibration between force and brakes, and we can do that really easily, but if we do tend to kind of develop a kind of standard one, typical one, and you're right, weird is going to throw that off. That's something that we find. So yeah, that's also we find kind of the batter's ability to use these different cues depends on kind of the pitcher's. The more kind of the weird, it's weird in a way. The smaller range you have, that's why like having a good separation and velocity between pitches makes it difficult, right? The closer things are together, it allows you to kind of use simpler cues instead of actually. So you can actually pick up the speed and direction of a pitch from its flight, but you kind of there's so little time, it's difficult to do. So the batters tend to latch onto these little cues like launching, like the angle it's coming out, the vertical angle, which can make. So I think that's why pitch tunneling is works against some batters, because they're really relying on these simple cues, and you're confounding them by making two pitches come out the same. You're taking away the information from them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are that's kind of what we know. So batter, surprisingly, picking up. You can't really distinguish pitches based on speed alone. The visual information for speed. I was surprised, but I didn't believe that when I first. I think Greg Maddox said that one time, and I was like, "There's no possible way." But then I did all the calculations and stuff, and you can't tell the difference because of the distances and angles involved by the time you need to swing. Mm-hmm.
Let me interject here.
Sure.
I think angles, you just hit the word angles. I think angles has a great deal to do with what hitters can do. I think they feed on angles. And my feeling is that if I had a pitcher who threw between 70 and 90 miles an hour, and I threw the ball dead straight right down the middle of the plate at those 20 different speeds with the same arm action, you could be successful. Mm-hmm. If one pitch is 90, the next one's 80, the next one's 70, the next one's 75, the next one's 85. I think you could be extremely successful throwing dead straight, center, and be very successful, because I think hitters are looking for angles on whether to drop head on a ball down and in to the honey hole or certain pitches. And I think that's why the straight changeup, dead straight, right down the middle at these different speeds, given that the arm speed would be exactly the same, would be extremely difficult for hitters to determine. And I think it hits what you just said on the inability to pick up speeds that are coming straight.
Yeah, I agree totally, man. That's timing is the big hard thing in hitting, calibrating timing. And if you mess up with speeds a little bit, you just mess that up so much. Because batters, like I said, they want to, this kind of calibration process, you want to latch on to like these simple strategies for hitting. And if you can mix things up, you really throw that, make it.
Well, you really see it. You really see it when you're feeding a pitching machine and it's calibrated at a certain speed, which stays consistent and stays, the location's the same. And you put the ball in the machine and the guy hits a line drive. And then the one time you get a little lazy and it doesn't quite go into the slot for the machine at the exact same time that his eyes are seeing. And it can be 2 miles an hour difference and it throws their timing off.
Yeah.
Pitching machine. So I think that really cued that in on me.
Yeah. A pitching machine's a really good example. And going to that, that's one of the things I try when I'm talking about training hitters, like training against a pitching machine where you have the same speed every time is really dangerous, because you can develop like simple strategies for timing. Like I'm going to start my swing when the ball is this far out of the chute, right? But so you base it on a distance cue, a simple cue that's not going to work at all when you accidentally, you throw it in the wrong time, or you get a pitcher mixing speeds on you. You can't use the distance the ball is from you to time your swing anymore. So batters, if you let them though latch on to simple things like your angles and your, but then you can sort of take advantage of that and kind of break it. If you break it up, they're going to really mess up. Yeah.
Is there an influence on the batter's anticipation of the coming pitch based on the information he got from the previous pitch? Is there any carryover as far as, and pitchers have a lot of success, adding, subtracting, changing locations. Is that because the previous pitch influences anticipation of what the next pitch is going to be? What do you think is going on there? Relative to direct perception and the sensory information that he's getting, is there a carryover?
Yeah, I definitely. We found, I kind of over the years done some models, and we found the previous like 2 or 3 pitches are really kind of calibrating. Both in terms of getting the timing for a particular pitch, and then also kind of anticipating sequences, like trying to guess the kind of the situational information. He's really, you get you're not going to throw me 3 straight curveballs that, you really mess up a hitter kind of thing. So yeah, definitely they seem to get.
Do you think there's a time lag there, like a time period where that might erode and he'd have to start anew? Or, like if it was, I threw a pitch and then we had a timeout, we had a streaker on the field. Is that impression still there? Or like, do you think there's a window there where we can still influence based on the previous pitch?
There is, we do see that calibration kind of decays pretty quickly. So yeah, I think I know I've done a little bit of it in baseball. I also know there's other sports where they show if they, take you away from it. This sounds like a weird one, but I know a study with darts. They were doing professional darts player, and they just showed like the time it takes between turns. The first throw is a little less accurate than the third one. So they lose their calibration, it's like a matter of barely a minute. So yeah, you definitely can. The other thing, like, the timing, obviously they get to learn the timing, your timing as a pitcher. That's why, the things like Johnny Cueto and Marcus Stroman and stuff do, where the pausing, delivery, and things really messes them up to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How about time between pitches? I mean, the hitter sees a pitch, and you have a fast worker or you're a slow worker. Would that have any bearing on what their thought process might be in terms of repeatability? What Randy brought up.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if there's, not that I've seen. I've seen. I've found if you kind of really distract hitters between pitches, it can kind of mess them up, because that's when they're kind of getting ready and doing some thinking about it. So maybe, yeah. If you were a really fast worker, it could kind of disrupt a player's rhythm and getting this.
So let's take an extreme example. Let's say I throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball right at a guy's neck and knock him on his ass.
Mm-hmm.
And I get back on the mound and I want to throw right now before he can clear his head or whatever. wouldn't that be an advantage for the pitcher as opposed to letting that hitter kind of resettle and get out of his head that he almost got killed with a pitch?
For sure. I think when you get kind of an emotional, you can get kind of emotional reaction too in there. Those are going to take a bit of time to clear, and especially that first base, they're not going to be, good hitters. We want to be, they're thinking along with it. Oh, okay, it's 2-0. Where am I looking for a pitch? Where I want to attack? And if you buzz them and they're thinking about that, they're not going to have time to do that properly for the next. So definitely, I think you back it up.
Rob, could you give us a quick sort of summary of Gibson's direct perception theory and how it applies to pitching and hitting? How, like in a high intensity movement, it's the sensory information you gather that influences the way you move. And can you kind of expand on that the information that emerges is really influencing the way you move?
Yeah, so the Gibson's kind of idea is that the direct perception is that there's information in the actual environment that directly gives you what you need to act. You don't really have to do a ton of internal processing in your head or computation. So there's information from the actual ball flight that tells you when it's going to be there and where it's going to cross the plate. It's just hitting's difficult because you have such a short time to use it and plug it in. Good hitters seem to, as I said, they seem to use it all the way along, and they're making adjustments all the way along. Good hitters are great. They're compensating, right? You threw them off. They got their foot down a little bit too quick from your body language, but they can delay the shift after they pick something else up later. That's kind of what I see. So that's the basic idea. And the kind of that and Bernstein kind of combining the idea that there's no one swing, right? The repeatable swing. It's varying from swing to swing. I can get into controversial pitch and no repeatable delivery to idea in a pitcher, but that's the basic idea. So you can, as a pitcher, you can kind of confound the direct perception by doing all these other things that. So there's this information there, but there's also these simple cues that they can latch onto, and that in a pitcher can kind of disrupt the timing and things like that. Yeah.
So you can use direct perception to create deception, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. You can use. We kind of we're very. I sometimes use it. We're really lazy learners. Like we want to pick up the simplest, right, information to try to pick up some tip you're throwing off or simple cue for picking up your pitches, rather than doing a really complicated and tracking the ball and stuff. So if you can. Give a tunneling effect or something like that, I think you can really throw them off. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this will be my last question, but I'm just fascinated by all the stuff that Robin. So talk a little bit about what you have on that implicit learning. When you learn skills implicitly, they tend to withstand psychological pressure a little better.
Okay. Yeah. So the idea is that when most of us learn, like the way that I learned how to play golf, which is I'm not very good. I was told like the traditional explicit way, had a coach standing there. Okay, you need to bend your knees this much. You need to overlap your baby finger on the club and hold it this way. And so very explicit verbal instructions. And the idea is the old kind of one way we think learning happens is that after practice enough, I kind of internalize those and they become automatic. And one thing that this person, Rich Masters, proposed is if you get under enough pressure, people revert back to these things. They start remembering these things and they start thinking about their mechanics, basically, the body instructions you gave them. Whereas if you learn it kind of without reference to, implicitly so you learn it kind of without reference and verbal instruction to what your body's doing, you can't go back to that. Is kind of the idea. So we do see some evidence of that. We do see some, people get movement patterns that are look novice-like under pressure. Sometimes they go back to doing very simple movements instead of the more complex one. Like in golf, if you ever play golf, like novice golfers, you're kind of afraid to do a really big swing on a bunker shot or something because you're worried too much can go wrong. So you can see people under pressure kind of do a short, choppy swing sometimes. So yeah, that can happen. I've done a little bit on pressure and pitching, and I've seen that kind of effect.
Talk about that.
I think so. Yeah, this is another thing that I talk to most people about. One of the things I've changed with the teams, some of the teams I've worked with, I've changed is how you give information to a pitcher about a hitter, right? So I think one thing is I think it needs to be individualized. Different pitchers want different things, but one of the things we found dangerous and you have to be careful about is when you give a heat map or something like that about a batter's strengths and weaknesses. Like so you make a graph with their OBP or a way to, in little grids. Making like a big bright red one that says like they have a 450 OBP here is kind of like saying don't think about pink elephants kind of thing, right? You're basically cueing them or don't hit it left in golf. There's a lake over there. It's way better. I much prefer to edit that out and just show them their targets, the goals, what you want to do. Don't show them the areas to avoid if you're going to present information. I find that works. That's one study we did kind of showed that. So that's
one of the things on these heat maps, when you look at, and I kind of agree, when you look at Mike Trout's heat map, I've had pitchers say to me, "Where the hell do I even throw the ball?" And the problem is when they see bright red outside of the strike zone, high out of the strike zone, inside, outside. Their first question to me is, "Damn, this guy hits everything. He hits." And really, what the analysts are trying to tell you is that there is when you throw a ball, which is where those pitches are, that is not a good thing. That you cannot just dismiss the fact that you've gone 1-0. That just don't blow it off and say, "Oh, it's no big deal." The fact that I'm 1-0 right now instead of 0-1. And so that's how we try and frame the bright red that you see outside of the strike zone itself. The pitchers seem to think this guy can hit a ball 5 feet over his head, when really it's just a ball which influences the count, which probably influences the score of the game more than anything. So just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think you also have to emphasize if you show average, that's a 30%, right? There's still 70% of that you got. I was a hockey goalie for a long time, and one of the first drills my coach did with me is he made me do this practice activity where I came out and challenged the shooter, but I wasn't allowed to move. I just had to stand there. And he wanted me to notice how many times they actually scored when I just stood there and did nothing. And it wasn't that it takes a lot of accuracy to put it around the goalie into the corner. So, especially at a lower skill level. So I think that's kind of the same with the pitcher. You got to remember, he's good everywhere, but it's relative. You still can get him out. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
So, so that's kind of the pressure thing. Trying to think of some of the other things we've been doing. You
did some research.
Sorry.
Check swings, right? Did you tell me what was your research you did on check swings? And
yeah, so we're looking at these kind of things, kind of what you'd probably predict. It seems kind of self-evident. We looked at how effectively a batter could check their swing, and what they seem to be using. And when they seem to check their swing is when you get this kind of disagreement between these kind of sequence of cues we're talking about. So if you throw an unusual pitch in a curveball and a fastball count, right? So they're anticipating one thing, and later on in the sequence of events they recognize it's a curveball. They kind of check. So that's kind of what we found. You could kind of predict when they would check it and how effectively they'd be able to do it. Based on kind of how the different pieces of information matched up with each other, that kind of thing. So,
during remember that whole sign thing. Sorry, Brent, if it's too soon, but I did a little video where I caught 2 bullpens of some big league guys and told them not to do what was coming. And just from personal experience, when you don't anticipate, you can catch the ball. It's the mismatch that makes you not able to catch it, right? Like you just can't.
Yeah.
If you're expecting it to do something and it does something else, it really screws up. But if you just don't expect anything and just clear your mind and react, you're good at it. So that speaks to the question about like, can a hitter just go up there and see it and hit it? Or does he have to have some sort of anticipate? Would he be better off not anticipating and just going up there, clearing his mind and seeing it and hitting it?
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Randy. I think you could make an example with you, like being crossed up as a catcher. You really mess up, right? It's almost impossible to actually catch it. Whereas if you just sat back there and you didn't know the pitcher was catching, I'm sure you could catch every pitch pretty easily, right? You can see the ball and you have fast hands, but it's just the anticipation of what to expect and the mismatch is really. I don't know. I find and it's hard to know. Some hitters say they like to just sit back and do nothing, and you can't tell whether they're really how much they're actually thinking through it. So I find there's individual for sure. But in theory, I think you could do a lot. Sometimes anticipating can be dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm trying to think what else. Most of the recent stuff I've done has been looking at training hitters and kind of the benefits of adding more variability to practice and pitch locations and how that's using more constraints approaches to training hitting, those kind of things. So I think some of it would mirror pitching. We found kind of. So I have a recent hitting study where I looked at training hitters by giving them kind of explicit verbal instruction about how to swing. A constraints approach where we kind of did like connection balls and things like that. And then a differential learning approach where we just try a whole bunch of different batted weights, different positions, different things. And we found the latter two were both good, but the constraints was kind of the best when you have, particularly if there's a particular thing you want to work on with a pitcher, you get rid of or move them away from. I really like a constraints approach, adding connection ball, throwing in sand, all the ones we've talked about. I think those are really effective.
I think with hitting and throwing, like it seems to me like with hitting, you would need more variability in the hitting than you don't need as much variability in throwing.
Yes.
So we found that like extreme edges of weighted balls, like really heavy ones and really light ones, you don't need that much variability. You need to kind of, get it closer to reality because it's a closed skill and you don't have to respond to the stimulus so much. And so I think a lot of times in pitcher training, when we went to variability, some people started overdoing the amount of variability that you actually need to get the performance outcome. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah,
I completely agree, Randy. Variability, I think it's always good, but it needs to be proportional to the amount that the athlete's going to face. Like a reactive skill, like hitting, you got a ton, right? So you need a ton. Being a football running back, you need a ton. Versus being a pitcher or a sprinter, where you are more in control of the action and you're less reactive. I still think and I'm sure you agree, you still need some. You need to be able to pitch under when you're fatigued, different mounds, different weather conditions, So I still think some variability is good, but you're right. You got to kind of make it proportional to what you expect in your skill in your sport. And also, like I'm really beginning to believe, and I know this is right, your alley too, that variability is also kind of a mechanism for injury prevention, right?
Sure.
Both in terms of. Yeah. So I think the three things that cause injury, we're focusing on two, right? Overuse and load. The third one is variability. Like I think variability can mitigate the effects of the other two, both in terms of practice conditions and a pitcher being able to adjust. Like when you jump off a high thing, being able to land slightly different, so you don't always put the load in exactly the same way. I think mitigates injury. So
absolutely, I think the definition of overuse is repeating your mechanics over and over again exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. You're using the tissues in the exact same way every time. So you want to have some variability there. You just don't want to have uncontrolled, and you want to have, I think you want to have rehearsed the deviation. Like your arm's always going to deviate.
Exactly.
And I think that like variability in training allows us to rehearse and speed up the correction, right? We talked about this before. Speed is a skill, and your arm moving fast is like a luge going down a tunnel. If it's wobbling all over the place, it's not going fast. So you need to decrease. You need to be able to correct really rapidly the deviations that are going to occur. And I think that by training with variability, you learn to make, I think throwing the ball harder is merely a matter of being an expert at making corrections faster than everybody else.
Yeah, 100%, Randy. I think the expression I like to use is correcting errors is the athlete's job, not the coach's. Right? You need to be able to correct your own errors during your movement. If you get out in front as a hitter, that happens to every hitter, the best hitters in the world. You need to be able to compensate and between the other movement body parts and have kind of, we call it synergies, motor synergies between your different joints and body parts. So they're compensating for each. One gets a bit ahead, the other one lags a bit behind to make up for it. And I think you learn that implicitly. Coaches can do a little bit to push certain things, but the athlete needs to learn that themselves and do that themselves. It makes it more adaptable, less fragile, I think. Definitely.
You have a question, Ollie?
Yeah, Rob, kind of going back to the beginning of the conversation when you talked about swing decisions and kind of in one of your check swing research that you talked about kind of certain points from the beginning of the delivery where he can kind of have that stop signal where the swing, is maybe told to not continue. Do you see those overlapping with the decision-making process, or do you have to have a start swing in your head to create the stop swing that you talked about? In essence, the things at the beginning like situational probability and, advanced cues and the ball flight in the first 150 milliseconds, do those kind of go hand in hand to what you did and what you talked about on how they would decide to stop the swing as well? Is that?
Yeah. So I from all of the stuff I've done is really hitting is not a decision whether to swing. It's a decision whether to stop it or not on every swing. Like you have to start every time unless you're going to take a pitch right from the get-go and just stand there. Like you have to start the weight shift and the basic body movement. So you're really deciding whether or not to let it go or not on every swing. I do see that. We see. I've done a bunch of experiments with force plates with hitters shifting their weight, and they do seem to be that mechanism. That part of the swing seems to be a lot based on the information they're getting from the pitcher, and it's just as important as the last part where the bat's actually coming through. All that kind of shifting weight forward and back, loading, right? Good hitters are loading on the back foot and then unloading onto the ball, So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Dusty, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
So you did a lot of work at Duke about like tracking ball flight and identifying, like what makes a pitcher unique and how we can use that information to attack hitters. Do you have anything that Rob could kind of link us with as to why some stuff worked and some stuff didn't?
In some regard, I think if you get back to the whole tunneling piece, I don't think that's really something we see common as people like to talk about it. Pitchers don't routinely throw the ball exactly where they want to. And so you still get swing and miss and really high output on pitches that don't always go where we want or that didn't tunnel with the previous pitch. But to add to that, and a little what Brent talked about, when you see pitches that stay on plane, it seems like, and I'm sure could probably get more follow-up, it seems like it becomes a bigger challenge, to have a pitch that rides overlapping or working with a pitch that sinks more, as opposed to a pitch that's more horizontal working with other horizontal pitches. And I think if you believe that hitters are going to pick up on these angles, the quicker that you can reduce the angles that they're allowed to help to identify what pitch they're hitting, seems to be effective. So we've had pitchers that have had ride at Duke, and they had a more horizontal slider that had a lot of ball in play, or at least couldn't finish guys. You had a lot of foul balls. When we got them a little bit more vertically shaped with their slider, now it started to play up a little bit more, because it again, in theory, it seemed to stay on plane longer before those two pitches separated. They weren't in the same tunnel, just like a fastball in and a fastball away aren't in the same tunnel, but they're both strikes. We were just trying to create more on plane action, as opposed to saying, all right, this has got to be in the same spot, 20 feet out of hand. And because we were just seeing, our first rounder last year, it took me 3 or 4 innings to find 2 pitches that did that, but he's getting tons of swing and miss, and he's throwing against some pretty good teams at our level. And so it's trying to separate, okay, if we're not really tunneling, what are we doing that's helping this swing and miss continue to play up?
Yeah, no, I think that's good stuff. I think a couple of points. The more vertical plane, you can get the bigger margin for error of a bat is horizontally, right? Going along, if you miss, you got a lot more margin for error than vertical as a hitter. I find, I think that's what throws people off, even when you watch GIFs of pitches. I think you're getting an idea for a particular plane of movement. And when it's way different, it looks like something jumps or some weird, it's still doing a continuous path, like most cases. But you're just, some kind of big difference in the plane of movement. It really throws hitting off and perception off.
Do you think that's because the hitter has to get more information from the pitcher, and he only gets that little bit of time on information from the ball? Like, do you think the hitter has to depend on the pitcher's cues more than the baseball flight itself?
Yeah, I think it's just natural to kind of latch onto any of those things you can. If you can pick up some regularities, then it just makes it easier than trying to actually, and then you're going to get earlier too. Like the like Dusty was saying, if you have you have to just wait so long to make a decision. If you're going to kind of pick up the information in flight, you're just going to be, that's why bat speed comes in. We really want to get quick bats. Bat speed is the biggest thing it gives you. It gives you power and stuff, but it lets you wait longer, right? As a hitter, so you can wait for more information to unfold. That's the really big advantage it gives you. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you had a guy, and you try to take advantage of that information. You knew this hitter's bat speed. He has really quick bat, or he didn't have a quick bat. How could we use that to attack him, to work against him? Like, obviously, if he's got a slow bat, you throw it harder. But if you're facing a guy with a really quick bat, you need to have 2 pitches that change trajectory late in the movement. Is that correct? You think?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can see this when an individual hitter loses bat speed. As they get older or something, they start guessing more, like they're getting that. So they're more susceptible to any of the early things you can fool, like, pitching backwards or any kind of early thing in your delivery or thing, or having a different body angle. That's going to make a batter with low bat speed really in trouble. Right, because they can't wait until they get better information. They got to jump on these things. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing I would say.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So sometimes you got a guy with slow bat. You think just throw it hard, but he's trying to anticipate. You might be able to deceive him more by not throwing it hard. And people worry about that. Like, I'm gonna,
Yeah.
I guess it comes. Can I throw it hard enough to get by him every time? Then you just throw it hard, right? But
yeah,
if he's guessing, then you start working.
Yeah, I know there's this kind of, you don't want to speed up their bat by throwing them slow stuff, right? But yeah, I think you're right. You got to kind of balance those two things of, bat skills versus the speed. Yeah.
One thing, this pitcher will remain nameless, but he's very, very good. And his idea of throwing a fastball, for example, if you throw a fastball dead center and he takes it, he has no qualms about coming back with the same exact pitch. If he throws that same pitch and the hitter swings at it, then he will often go to something else or in a different location. But just taking a pitch does not, in his mind, does not allow the hitter to really feel the pitch, so to speak, because he just took it and did not make a movement toward the ball. So a lot of times he'll just throw back-to-back fastballs, same spot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Brandon. I think it's, interesting thing. I've always wanted to study, and this is a part of the catcher's job too, Randy, like reading the swings.
Yeah.
Was he late on that? Did he take it? So coming up with strategy on how the hitter reacts, I think is a good point. The other, I've always wanted to, from a pitcher's view, I've wanted to do, we mentioned do some eye tracking where pitchers pick up the target and how long they stay on it. I've been trying to do some research on that. It's very hard because the damn head movements involved in pitching are they've knocked the eye tracker off way too fast. So, but I've always been interested to see if that kind of has any effect on, control or anything like that. I think
your subjects aren't good enough, then you need great head doesn't move very much.
Just get a big duct tape. Yeah. And also, there's too much bright light here, right, to do eye tracking, so it's paining. Yeah.
So, Dusty, we've seen a couple guys now that the ball does different stuff depending on where they throw it. It moves differently depending on where they throw it. Have you seen anything like that, Dust?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because Connor's in the room here, and he's just weird. You look at his averages; it looks like he's got a dead zone fastball, but he'll have one that carries at 18 to 20, and then he'll have the next fastball. If it's low, it'll think at the average looks like 14, but each pitch was different. And having caught his bullpens, it seems like there's something that he does when he throws the ball up. He manipulates it differently than when he tries to throw it down.
Yeah, I think there's values in some regard in knowing like the best version. And it's not like, so if you're trying to figure out like what are the metrics on the pitches that play up the most? Mm-hmm. And it's not like you can throw that pitch, 100 times in a row. Like hitters adjust, just like we're talking about with anything. But it's being able to identify, what's going on with a pitch, what version of that pitch plays up, and then what version of that pitch maybe becomes more compromised if there's enough information on it. And I think you see it with breaking balls even more. I mean, you've got some guys that are throwing 2 or 3 pitches that are breaking away from their arm side or towards their glove side. And I think that ambiguity maybe creates some complexity with them, what hitters are trying to do, because if you're looking for a breaking pitch and you're getting 2 or 3 that are, especially from what I've seen, if they have negative release angles on all of them, now you're not even giving away that kind of initial kind of rise or incline before the ball comes back down. You're just seeing everything on its way down out of hand. But I think ambiguity is good. I think if it's in relative control of what you're trying to do, then there's value there. But if you've got there's a couple guys that, can't hit a ball above their hands to save their life. If you can do it on command, that's even better if you can get it there. But if you want the one that rides and you don't get that one, then I think that may at times become compromising.
Sometimes the randomness is just poor movement, and they're just so radical that they don't know what the ball's going to do. You can't even decide how to do that. So I got Wes up here. Wes has some really good ideas. He works in our lab and he's our director of player development here and works in our lab a lot. And I hear him say this to pitchers all the time about command, is that, Wes, you tell them they're just trying to throw the ball in a place that it doesn't want to go. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the guys that are like vertical fastballs that are from typically a higher slot or just a straighter slot, I think a lot of times in those guys are just constantly trying to throw balls down and away. They just have a hard time getting it there on a regular basis, and they end up having to make like much bigger changes to their overall movement to try to get it there. And so a lot of times when guys, with that, like the vertical fastball, for example, just embrace trying to throw it straight in that top of the zone, it gets a lot easier to throw it there consistently and with like consistent movement. They're not trying to cut or sink a ball to get it down in the zone. And it's kind of the same thing on, on breaking balls as well. If a guy has like a true 12-6, he's going to have a more difficult time, throwing that pitch away on a regular basis. But if he just kind of embrace like letting it bite in the middle, it gets a lot more consistent. I'm not sure if anybody else is like seeing that, but just kind of throwing the ball where it wants to go and letting it kind of work.
Gyro sliders.
Yeah, it makes it just a lot easier to throw it in the strike zone, in the location.
That's cool. So that's cool. So it makes me think of kind of the concept we use the terms intrinsic dynamics. So you have these kind of coordination tendencies that everybody has, kind of attractor states you naturally want to go to, and you have to recognize when you're doing training someone, you're building on top of those. Sometimes you can't force a square peg into a round hole, right? They're going to have these natural tendencies they want to do, and you have to kind of be aware of those if you want to kind of create a new delivery or a new thing. So, yeah.
And for some guys, if you look at your boy Jake in 2019, like one reason I think his fastball played up so well. I mean, he couldn't throw a fastball down in the zone, maybe I don't know that it was happening once every 3 or 4 starts for him. Like everything was up and above the zone. So there's tremendous value in his common misses being above the zone in these great chase and swing and miss locations. And so there's huge value in that. Like if he's who he is and that's where the ball's going, and when it misses, it's in these great chase locations, like heck yeah. Same thing for guys throwing, these breaking pitches. If their biggest swing and miss zone is down below the zone and that's where they're routinely missing, then, you're getting pitches that go where you want them. And then they're missing in these great chase and swing and miss locations. But the counterbalance to that is the lefty that can't go in on a righty. And so, you're halfway through a season and he's got 0 HBPs against righties, and guys are barreling balls 95 plus exit velos off the plate away because he's just never middle in. In that regard, that's not really a great swing and miss location, but it is a location that hitters might be able to get to a little bit more. And so I think there's a dynamic to each of those types of guys, where is it in a location that's favorable for more swing and miss, or a location that's maybe more favorable for hitters to be able to take advantage of the fact that maybe you're not missing enough on the other side of the plate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that the tolerance for error is kind of like a constraint on, performance. Sometimes you have to think about, basketball players learn kind of the release point that gives the biggest tolerance for error coming down at the rim, and so I think you want to kind of, take that into account. Good misses, I think, is a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, well, Rob, that was real. Anybody else got anything, any more questions or any more additions? Anybody that might add to this? Rob, you were awesome, man. That's exactly what anybody.
Yeah, so it was fun.
Yeah, Rob, I got a question for you. Sorry.
Sure. No problem.
Yeah, sorry. So I just kind of want to touch on your guys' variability piece that you and Randy were kind of going back and forth on. And I just wanted to ask, like, when we talk about variability, we want to add it into their training and into what they're training. But how do we know that the athlete isn't just adjusting to the stimulus slowly, that we could be right there to where we're going to have that breakthrough, and then all of a sudden we add in more variability and we take a step back?
So you're trying to move in a certain direction, and they kind of, you're trying to get them to change their delivery, and you're adding variability, and then you do too much. It's kind of the.
Yeah, I guess kind of what I'm asking, but it's more along the lines of, like, do we know, like, in terms of that stimulus, like, how do we know they're just not adapting to it slowly? Like, we could be right there, and getting to where we want to get that movement change, but then all of a sudden we throw in that variability. Have you guys had any, I guess, time for that to happen?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. You got a guy that's stuck at 90, 92, and you're trying to get him to 95, let's say, and he's in this attractor state where he's really comfortable where he is, and he's good. And you think, okay, I'm going to add a weighted ball program here to kind of shake up and provide some instability in the attractor, so he'll bounce to another state and break out of that and get to another 95 mile an hour tunnel, right? But you don't know if if I add this, is he going to go backwards? In our experience, you guys, my staff here can chime in on this too. You don't really know. Honestly, there are times when you add a new stimulus because you're trying to perturb the attractor state and make it unstable. So he has to organize a different pattern. And you don't know that it's going to work right away. And you don't know that you're not going to make him worse. I think you have to that's where sort of the art of coaching comes in, and you try. And that's why, measuring things constantly and understand and knowing your player, I think, comes into play. And sometimes I try something new and I know right away, oh no, this is terrible. I'm not doing this anymore. This athlete, his body hates that. Right. And then sometimes it's like, well, he just needs to get used to it a little while. So it's a question of when do I stop digging for diamonds? Am I almost there? Or do I turn around and leave the diamond shaft? And Rob, I don't know, we're talking about just destabling, passive and active emergency attractors. How do you know? And I don't think in ecological, I don't think you do know, do you?
No, I think that's a great point. That's a great question. It's a really hard one. You're right. That's what the hard, I think, especially when you're first moving to these more self-organization methods, you have to be careful about giving up too early. You want to right away, they haven't got it right away, I'm going to stop doing this drill. So I think you have to be aware of that. But yeah, I think as a coach, you got to, is it going in the right direction I want? There's no obvious way to tell. I like to think of converging constraints. So, all right, instead of just increasing the weight of the ball more and more, let's add a different one on top of it that can kind of achieve the same mound height, so kind of adding to it. But yeah, that is a real challenge. I think you don't want to wait around forever, but you need to give it time. I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but yeah.
No, I guess what I could kind of piggyback onto that, if you guys don't mind, is when you look at that, when both of you guys exchanged that dialogue, it was more like, we don't know. So would you say that there's some value to us changing the way we cue that athlete rather than us just going to a different variable training method, rather than us just kind of hoping that if we throw something new, like say we throw a weighted ball, different constraint at him, that he's going to organize the way we want him to, rather than maybe we could just get him to cue him just a touch differently, and then if that doesn't work, then we add in the variability.
Yeah, this is something I was talking about in a recent thing we do. I think, despite the kind of movement away from telling an athlete being prescriptive, I think it's okay to step in sometimes and say, why don't you try bending your knee more, or maybe cue it in externally, or I think, to give a little guidance, as long as you're kind of doing it to let them kind of continue to find their own thing. I think rather than here's the exact way I want you to throw, I think that's a good thing to add at times for sure. I don't know. What do you think, Randy?
I agree. People that use this ecological approach, we get knocked on all the time that, we're not allowed to talk. Mm-hmm. But a verbal cue is a constraint if it's used properly, Mm-hmm. And one thing I like to do when I'm giving verbal cues is I like to ask the athlete a question like, okay, when you made that really good pitch, where did you feel like the energy began, or something like that? And then he tells me what he felt, and then that becomes his cue. It's sort of intrinsic knowledge of results, sort of like he tells me what it felt like because I don't know what it felt like, and then maybe I can remind him to kind of find that feel again, right? But it was his words, not mine. That seems to be really helpful there. But sometimes you're right. Sometimes you just jump in and go, stop doing this, or do this like this. This is what, and especially in the beginning, you got to give them a sort of an idea of what you want them to do. You have to give them sort of an overall construct of what we're trying to achieve here. And so verbal cues are fine. I think that the problem with them is they're probably the most easily corrupted and probably the most overused, right? Because words mean different things to different people, right? When you say you're flying open, what does it mean? Okay. It could be misinterpreted, and you're always challenged with the problem that your brain can't tell your body what to do in a high intensity movement after a certain point. It's got to be the sensory information that guides you after that. So yeah, I think that maybe try cueing them a little differently or something like that. But the thing is with variability, especially in pitching, it's a lot easier because you kind of know what the movement is that you're after, and you can kind of direct your variability. You can kind of use the variability to perturb it and to guide self-organization, right? Like beavers self-organize, build their dams the same way, unless we drop a boulder in the river upstream, right? And movements always approach this, and this is sort of dynamic mathematics. They bifurcate. The multi-stability concept, Rob. They split into different levels of stability, and whether it's effective or not, as long as the body's comfortable there, it's going to keep doing it. And so this is out of Franz's book. You have to find that movement decision the guy's making, the bifurcation, and then you insert the variability right in that area to make his body uncomfortable doing the same thing it's doing over and over again, and let him organize a new path. And then you have to evaluate that new path and see if it's more productive. And that's where a lot of the data comes in handy, because it's like, is it better or worse? And you can't make the decision right away. But, if you got a guy who's not moving the way you want and you change him and the stuff gets worse and it keeps getting worse, you just don't do that anymore. But I also think that we don't give credit to the body enough that just because he does it for a little while, it's not going to screw him up forever. Like you can, if it's not working, you can bring him back. It's not that unadaptable, right? Unless you're kind of ramming it through with cognitive and top-down cues. If you can just train implicitly, you can kind of wander back and forth, and it's not so permanent. If it goes awry, you can bring it back as long as you're kind of using implicit methods to get there.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
No, I agree, Randy. I think that's a really good way to think about it. And yeah, sometimes we're a little too worried about, this is going to mess him up if he does this other kind of movement or thing. I think you're right, as we get too specific, I think sometimes, where you're right, you can let people vary and they can get back to it. It's right. The kind of going back to that pressure thing you talked about with explicit learning, if you cram a really explicit verbal thing in their head, then that can be dangerous, like you said.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Cool.
Any other questions today? Rob, this was awesome, man.
That was fun.
Doing this. Did you recorded this, right?
I did. Yeah. I'll put it out in the audio out in a podcast. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome, guys.
This was great.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Cheers, guys.
See you guys.
Thanks, guys. See you guys.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including written transcripts, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.
Gone straight away.